Hello, I'm John Davis, and this discussion will cover distinguishing between freedom and liberty. When I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1983, I understood that I was surrendering some of my freedom in the name of a cause greater than myself. To pull a line from the Marine hymn, I had enlisted to be first to fight for rights and freedom, despite signing to serve beneath a chain of command, obligated to follow the lawful orders of those over me, and subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You cannot simply quit the military or phone it in if you aren't feeling up to what the day may hold. After I was commissioned in the Army in 1995, my status changed to some extent. I was still not free in the classical sense, but once I fulfilled my obligations I incurred for educational reasons, I did have the option to resign my commission at any time outside of certain deployment windows, but despite that I still enjoyed the blessings of liberty and stood ready to defend them. Moira Walsh suggested in her 1997 article, Aristotle's conception of freedom, that Aristotle's notion of freedom as rational self-direction is at least worth further consideration, as it precludes both totalitarian coercion and self-destructive license, and that a free man can never be forced to do what is good, for he must direct himself to ends that he himself sees are choice-worthy. She couched that statement in such a manner due to Aristotle's rather elitist views regarding class and labor. Chaim Wirszubski demonstrated Romans believed liberty referred to the liber, that is, the free man in opposition to the slave. Free means capable of possessing rights of one's own. This is possible only if one is not subjected to someone else's dominion. Liberty, therefore, consists in the capacity for the possession of rights in the absence of subjugation. Quentin Skinner leaned heavily on Cicero's Philippics as the source of libertas, stating, as Cicero's closing remarks makes clear, to enjoy de facto freedom of action is not necessarily to enjoy liberty. If your freedom is held at the discretion of anyone else, such that you continue to be subject to your will, then you remain a slave. To enjoy liberty, in other words, it is not sufficient to be free from coercion or the threat of it. It is necessarily to be free from the possibility of being threatened or coerced. Geoff Kennedy provided an interesting example of Cicero's assessment of Plato's views on liberty in the Democracies, in Cicero, Roman Republicanism, and the Contested Meaning of Libertas. He states, having rehearsed the democratic conception of liberty as a form of popular control over the deliberative functions of the state, Cicero equates this notion of liberty with licentia, or license, when speaking in his own voice, rather than rehearsing a democratic argument. He relies on Plato's caricature of the liberty found in Democracies. It is necessarily follows in such a state that liberty prevails everywhere to such an extent that not only are homes one and all without master, but the vice of anarchy extends even to the domestic animals. In the 17th century, philosopher Johannes Althusius described the jurist defining liberty as the natural faculty by which each person is permitted to do what he wishes unless something is prohibited by force or law, when discussing the types of supreme magistrates in the Politics. Perhaps most relevant to the commentary on liberty in the English-speaking world and how it contrasts with the rest of the world came from Daniel Hannan in his book, Inventing Freedom: How the English-Speaking Peoples Made the Modern World. He spends a great deal of time covering the Magna Carta and its importance to the concept of liberty throughout the English-speaking world. He discusses its establishment of equal rights under the law of the land, as well as tying it to the concept of property rights, which are unique within the Anglosphere. Unfortunately, we may see ourselves today in a position not unlike that described by Plato in his caricature of liberty in Democracies, with right described as left and wrong described as right. Part of that may stem from the neglect of liberty in its rights and responsibilities to include voting. and taking a direct role in the education of our children. There is also an erosion of liberty, certainly when you discuss the existence of counterculture and cancel culture, because who can truly say they are operating freely without the threat of coercion, or the existence of a bureaucratic state and the associated erosion of equal protections under the law? By looking at the historical example, starting with Aristotle to Cicero, to the Magna Carta and our own Constitution and Bill of Rights, which rests on its example, we can say that freedom is a state free from coercion or servitude limiting one's actions, while liberty is to be free from the threat of coercion and the possession and understanding of rights and responsibilities enjoyed by free people living within an equitable society with a system of fair, equitable, and civil laws for the protection of all. Thank you.